Being 7 o'clock, I'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order, please. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing. Following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we'll have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned organizational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, October 24th at 7 p.m., and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I would like to request everyone to put their cell phones and any other electronic devices on vibrate or silent as to not be an interruption to the meeting, and I thank you for your compliance. And we will proceed to roll call. I'd ask everyone to please sign in. Yes, you can. All right, thank you. And I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening, including the viewing audience, and thank you for your interest in county government. And we will proceed to item B, education presentations and/or reports. And we will start with item B7, standing committee chairpersons or designees. Any standing committee chairpersons or designees wish to present to the board? Okay. We will then move on to item B8, education presentation from Progressive Energy regarding conduit bonding request. And we have with us this evening Linda Templin and Ralph McGinley. So if those two individuals would like to, we also have one additional, and I apologize. I'll allow you to introduce the third gentleman, or second gentleman, third presenter, when you get to the podium. Yes, please.
How does
You can just hit
okay.
that arrow and you
Got
should be
it.
good.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Supervisors, for your record, my name is Ralph McGinley. I'm here tonight with the Progressive Energy team, and this is, as we understand it, at your request, and we're delighted to be here to provide an educational presentation on a renewable natural gas plant that is being proposed for Marathon County, and to give you the detail about how that renewable natural gas plant is put together, how it works, and especially answer any questions that you might have. Mr. Chairman, members, perhaps it would be most efficient for us to go through the PowerPoint presentation, and then we'd be more than happy to answer and stand for any questions that you might have. Mr. Chairman, I understand that we've got, 3 hours, 4 hours of presentation that we are.
Or 5 if you need it.
So we will, I promise, we will try to be as quick and efficient as possible. The one gentleman that was not introduced, Mr. Chairman, with us is Nick Cawley from Progressive Energy. Nick is the President, Chief Executive Officer of Progressive Energy, and he is going to begin with a PowerPoint presentation about RNG and how it works. So Nick, with that, and then following that, Linda Templin from Hush Blackwell will be talking about the legal side of the initial resolution that's in front of you, or will be in front of you, to request being an issuer for the bonds for supporting this project. And then we'll try to wrap it up as quickly as possible with the PowerPoint and stand for questions, as I said. So with that, Nick, please.
And I want to apologize for not dressing up a little bit better. I was over visiting a dairy just east of Green Bay, and I had to race to get over here in time and didn't get a chance to. And I see some of you people were dressed up pretty nicely. So again, I'm Nick Coyle. I've been in the electricity and natural gas business for about 35 years. Chief financial officer, some billion-dollar companies, some smaller companies for about 20 years. Chief risk officer, TXU, that's the biggest utility in Texas, so they're about 10 times bigger than We Energy. So I have a deep background in the energy business. And we work very closely, and I'll get more into this when we get into the slides, but I've had more than one person say, who is going to own this plant? Okay, Macquarie Capital is the biggest company that you probably have never heard of. They're a subsidiary of Macquarie Energy. So Macquarie Group, their sister companies, Macquarie Energy, they're about an $80 billion a year revenue company. They're based out of Sydney, Australia. They are very similar in nature to Goldman Sachs. They do 55% of their business in the United States today. They are the largest wholesaler of electricity in the United States. They overtook Shell 3 or 4 years ago. They're basically tied with BP, is the largest wholesaler of natural gas in the United States today. And these projects are very, very strategic to them. And so I run Progressive. Progressive, we develop and bring the projects to Macquarie and work with them to get them put together. But at the end of the day, they'll do all the engineering, all the permitting, write all the checks, build the projects, get them operating, and get them going. Macquarie owns the Green Bank in Europe, so that's probably the largest renewable energy company in Europe. They bought that from the government of the UK. So I have to figure out how to do this.
There you go.
It's this.
Yeah, he's got it.
So anyways, I'm going to go over real quickly what an RNG facility is. So in this case, and you can make renewable natural gas from a lot of different things, but swine and cow manure are probably the most valuable things. Not probably, they are the most valuable things that you can make renewable natural gas out, because those things without renewable natural gas are the heaviest per ton greenhouse gas emitters in the world. So they emit methane. Methane's about 40 times more potent than CO2 per metric ton. And so when you have a dairy farm and you put all of that manure into those pits, all of that methane just goes right up into the atmosphere. So what's driving what we're trying to do here is I call it green natural gas, but the industry calls it renewable natural gas. So what we're going to do in each of the projects we do is we'll collect all the manure from whatever the source dairy. We'll build an anaerobic digester, and we use DVO, Steve Dvorak's firm out of Clinton, Wisconsin. They're the largest builder of anaerobic digesters in the country. They're also the most efficient. And in this particular project that we're proposing will be built adjacent to the Vandergeest farm. So that's the address you see on the slide there. We'll get to this more on the later slide, but the Vandergeest farm we'll tell you their whole involvement, but essentially we're buying the manure from them for a price. We're going to convert it, and so we'll get to that slide in a little bit. So, but this facility will be owned primarily by Macquarie Capital. Progressive, at the end of the day, will keep a small slice of the facility. We're going to use 100% of the manure from this facility, and that has a lot of benefits, and we'll get into that slide a little bit later. And 150,000 MMBTUs of renewable natural gas. That's not a lot of natural gas in the scheme of things, but in the scheme of a renewable natural gas facility, that's pretty big. So what is the project? I've kind of gone over some of that already. Macquarie Capital is going to put up all the money. The project's going to cost in the neighborhood of $40 million, maybe $45 million by the time we're dealing with supply chain things like we did on the one we just went commercial with. Macquarie will put up, the project will be 30% equity, 70% debt. Macquarie will put up all the equity, and that's why we're here talking to you about issuing bonds. That will be the debt. And a 30-70 split's pretty common on these kind of projects. We have a project company, which is WIR&G VDG, which VDG stands for Vandergeest, but that's not owned by Vandergeest. End of the day, Macquarie owns that. We'll buy the cow manure, as I said, from Vandergeest, all of their cow manure. We'll convert it all to renewable natural gas and an anaerobic digester. We'll then take it into a CO2 scrubber, membrane scrubber system. And so what comes out of the digester is basically 58% methane, 42% CO2, and a little bit of H2S, hydrogen sulfide. We'll scrub the CO2 and H2S out, and then what we have when it's all over with, we have renewable natural gas. And so that is pipeline-ready renewable natural gas. For this particular facility, we'll put it into trucks and take it to the Zahn farm that we built, where we have a pipeline tap into the ANR pipeline where we'll inject that renewable natural gas. The size of this project, it will take about 2.5 truckloads a day to transport all of that gas. And because of some of the other things we're doing, we'll actually take some trucks off the road from what is being moved around today by concentrating some of the phosphate fertilizers. And I'm not going to get too much into that unless somebody wants to ask a question. So that's basically what we're doing. The Zahn farm that we'll inject into is 90 miles east of here. It's in Oconto County, very, very close, but not in the town of Gillett. And the Zahn farm is a little bit bigger than this one. There's not a convenient pipeline tap in this neighborhood. So that's the project in a nutshell. And Linda's going to go over
Yeah,
the legal
okay.
and what have you.
As I mentioned to a couple people here, I kind of know you. I worked with Bug Tussle on the broadband financing that we did, and Marathon County was a participating county in one of those issues. So I recognize a number of the names, and we were really happy to be able to work with the county on that. And I was excited about being able to come to the county about this proposal because it's similar in some ways, but it's different in some ways. So that's where the education part comes in. What we're asking tonight is that Marathon County serve as the conduit bond issuer for the project. And I think it might be helpful to think about how tax-exempt bonds evolved toward being permissible for a project like this. Way back when bonds were first done, they were municipal bonds because only municipalities could issue tax-exempt bonds. And the tax code was structured saying, these are municipal bonds, and because they're municipal bonds, they're tax exempt. And counties and cities and villages and towns borrowed for their own needs, whether it was the courthouse or the roads or water treatment or whatever. But they were for their own use. Then the code evolved, and Congress said, well, maybe we can create an incentive to make other types of projects occur that might not occur otherwise, things we want to happen. And so the first domino to fall was they said 501c3s, organizations that lessen the burdens of government by providing services, whether it's shelters or a Goodwill or any number of things, that if there was not a 501c3 who could afford to run the program or build the capital asset that they needed, the county or the city or the village or town might have to figure out how they were going to pay for services. And so they said, okay, well, we're going to piggyback on the existing structure, which said municipal bonds can be tax exempt bonds. And we're going to go under another section of the code, and we're going to say, and if you're a 501c3 and you want to borrow for a project that you will own and is used in pursuit of your exempt purpose, the IRS, not everybody who wants to be a C3 can be. They get what's called an IRS determination letter. So they said, other than that, we still have to have a municipality because our structure said municipal bonds are tax exempt bonds. So we're going to let 501c3s come in, and the municipality will simply be a conduit, a means of pass-through that allows them to access those sections. It's not county money, it's not a county guarantee, it's not anything but a conduit. And so that's what they did. Then they moved on to small issue manufacturing, said, we want that to be good. That would be a good thing if we could incentivize that. Well, actually, it was almost anything for a while. It was a free-for-all. There were so many bonds done for tax-exempt projects for private companies. So many Burger Kings and McDonald's were financed up to the 80s with those bonds. They called them burger bonds. But then Congress said, wait a minute. The McDonald's is a little footprint. It doesn't add a lot of tax base to the community. It provides a few jobs, but they're not high-paying jobs. The construction is not going to take a long time, so it isn't creating a lot of construction jobs. So they scaled way back. In the late 80s, they said, we're going to just say, if you're a manufacturer and you're a small manufacturer, now you can access this conduit bond concept. You've got to have a municipal issuer, but they're not on the hook. There is no exchange of money from any federal, state, local, any body. The reason that the borrower saves money is that the bondholder does not pay federal income tax on the interest income that they get from the bond. And as a result of that, the Treasury is deprived of some revenue, but the U.S. Treasury doesn't back it in any way. And we are limited by a concept called volume cap. Every state can only do so many of these bonds, and you have to have volume cap. In Wisconsin gets $600 million of volume cap a year. $300 million of that they give to WIDA for housing, and the other $300 is in a pool that's administered by the WEDC. It's not money, it's just the right to use a tax-exempt bond. So now there's $300 million in that pool, used for small issue manufacturing and for exempt facility bonds, which this bond is an exempt facility bond. 501c3s don't have to have volume cap. So that's how Congress controls the volume of the amount of money they're willing to have Treasury be deprived of. So we're asking you to be that conduit for this bond issue. The bonds would be sold in a private offering to sophisticated investors, most likely through D.A. Davidson. We want you to consider an initial resolution because both under state law and federal law, an initial is what I say a stake in the ground. Congress did not want bonds to be a refinancing tool. They didn't want Nick to go out and do a project and then 2 years later say, oh, should have done that as a bond. I would have saved some money. Then Congress wants to believe they incentivized the project to occur. They made it. In some ways, they made it more possible. But if he already did it, it isn't an incentive, right? So they said you can only include in a bond those costs that are incurred no more than 60 days prior to the date that a conduit issuer expresses their intent to issue bonds for the project. But it's a two-step process. Same thing, state law, got to have an initial resolution, got to have a final. So the initial resolution is that stake in the ground that keeps the project costs qualified if and when you and the borrower decide to proceed to do bonds. It is not binding on you and is not binding on the company without further action, but it does create that stake in the ground for purposes of qualified costs, and importantly, it allows us to apply for volume cap. Remember I said volume cap, the WEDC manages how much is available. Because of the number of these projects that we anticipate coming, both through this developer but others that I'm working on, it looks like in 2024, we could very well exhaust the 300 million because of the size of these projects. If you have 10, $40 million projects and we only have 300 million, it's gone, right? Exempt facilities can use what's called carry forward volume cap. So we want to apply, we have applied for volume cap in 2023. If they give it to us, then they can use carry forward. That's simply a certificate. They say, we're going to save this much of 2023 volume cap and let you use it in 2024. And that will take the pressure off volume cap for the number of projects that we see coming. So right now we have 3 separate $40 million applications in for volume cap. So that's the reason for the initial resolution being so critical. You may decide there are other issues you want to discuss before you go to a final resolution. I'll go into a little bit about what we provide that will along the way, but that's why. Also, you have bond counsel when you issue bonds for your own purposes. That's Quarles and Brady, and Quarles and Brady has been copied on everything that we've sent to you. Exempt facility bonds. I want to just talk about that a little bit because exempt facility bonds is a kind of a category that expands and shrinks. It's driven a little bit by policy and a little bit by politics. So when you look at categories of exempt facility bonds, you'll see that things like green projects and rapid rail and docks and wharves and housing and things like that are favored projects. In the recent Infrastructure Act, broadband and carbon capture were added. You can see these are the things that from a policy and a political standpoint are important right now to the decision makers, and so they expanded exempt facility to add those categories. When we did broadband with you, we didn't have that category, and those bonds were done as taxable. Unfortunately, Treasury hasn't developed enough regs. I don't know if the next broadband deal will be tax exempt or not. I don't know what they're doing. This project qualifies as an exempt facility because it's a solid waste facility. It takes something that would otherwise be waste and turns it into a first useful product that is supports the goals of why it was allowed in the first place. In this case, taking what that animal manure and converting it to as renewable natural gas, or as Nick says, green natural gas. And then Section 661103 of the Wisconsin statutes also authorizes the issue of conduit bonds for qualified projects such as this one. So that's where the statutory authority comes through. Lance had sent some additional questions after we had the PowerPoint done, and I'm going to try to weave in a few of the answers. One of the questions was other similar projects. About 4 or 5 months ago, we closed a project for Coleman Ponderosa, and that was an exempt facility project. That what they were doing is not identical, but it also qualified as a solid waste. This particular borrower also did the Zahn Farm project that he mentioned. That was done with tax-exempt bonds. Those were issued through the town of Gillett, and that financing was about 2 years ago. I've also done a lot of conduit bonds that fall under the category of exempt facility for ethanol plants in Jefferson County, in Necedah, and other counties. Ethanol plants qualify because an ethanol plant's about $140 million. $30 million of it is the cost associated with taking that wet, goopy corn mash that's produced when they're making ethanol and drying that, running it through a centrifuge, drying it into what I call giant rice cakes that can be converted to cattle lots and used for feed. Otherwise, that waste would sit on the ground. So you can see where policy, don't want to fill the landfills, want to get rid of the methane, hopefully in farms want to get rid of smelly lagoons. All these policy things are woven through that exempt facility project. And then, as I mentioned, Bug Tussle will also be qualified to do tax exempt bonds under that big list expanding and shrinking exempt facility category. So as I discussed conduit, these are municipal bonds. That's how Congress built the tax law, and then they started piggybacking on it. However, they are not general obligations of the county. The indenture, the bonds, your resolution, the offering document that goes to the public. Every single one of those documents has in multiple places, in bold letters, all caps, this is not a liability, the county is not responsible, it's boilerplate language. It's everywhere because you are not. You will never be liable for payment of principal and interest on the bonds. This is where it differs from the Bug Tussle deal we did with Marathon County. In that one, you guys were paid a fee because you're guaranteeing the replenishment of the debt service reserve fund. So in that instance, if the borrower didn't make a payment and they hit the debt service reserve fund and then the borrower didn't replenish the debt service reserve fund, the county has said, we'll step in and replenish it. And each county to the pro rata portion of the project costs they had in that county. There is no guarantee from the county in this. This is a pure conduit. There is no guarantee, there is no risk. You will have no ongoing responsibility for monitoring the project or the bonds. They do not count against your borrowing capacity. They do not count as with respect to your credit rating. Most municipalities now, their auditors will put a footnote in and it will say how many conduit bonds they have. And it says they're conduit bonds. It's not a liability. It's not listed as one. The offering document will say probably 2 sentences about the county. Marathon, the project is located in Marathon County. Marathon County is serving as a conduit issuer. There are no county financials and disclosure because the bondholders looking at it know you are not guaranteeing anything. It is not your debt. The county will also be reimbursed for any fees or costs that you have, including legal counsel, that are incurred. One of the questions, and the bond documents all also include broad indemnification provisions in case something would come up post-bond issue. I can give you an example of an instance because it happened recently. One of the conduit issuers for a small issue IRB contacted me and said they'd gotten a notice from the IRS that they were going to audit those bonds. And the county clerk, or the town clerk called me and said, oh, what do I have to pull together? Oh, I don't have time for this. And I said, no, you're the conduit issuer. When the bonds close, we file, the tax return is called an 8038, and you file it because you're the conduit issuer. If that request comes in, there's a simple piece of paper. You fill it out, you send it to the IRS, and it authorizes them. You say, I was a conduit, talk to the borrower, and you're gone. You don't do anything. But let's say Lance and the clerk and people spent a little bit of time when they got that notice and called me and had to fill the form out and whatever. That indemnification would cover any costs, administrative costs, or anything that you incurred as a result of that. That's a, unusual circumstance, but we are told with 8,000 new IRS agents, there'll probably be more audits, so that might be an instance. But as to anything else, the indemnification probably would never be called upon. What assurance do you have? As I said, the disclosure documents, everything that is presented to the public makes it clear that they are not your obligation. In addition, your legal counsel, Groves and Brady, will confirm that for you. You don't have to just rely on me. I don't represent the company. I'm bond counsel. I render the approving tax opinion, but everybody in the deal has a lawyer, because there just can't be enough of us. And then, so I said it's an expression of intent. We expect that as we go forward, We would hope to do the financing in the first quarter of 2024. What that would mean for the county is if you adopt an initial resolution, we would then build out a timeline. We would start circulating documents. You and your council would get copies of everything, including the disclosure document. One of the questions had been, would the county see feasibility studies, environmental and all that? All those reports will be in the offering document, and you'll get a copy of the offering document as well. And if you want to read them, you can read them, but, again, sometimes less is more, but it's all there. It's very transparent, and the bondholders are not going to buy them unless they understand all of that too. But it is the bondholders who are taking that risk. Then we would provide documentation. We would come back. We would need to have a public hearing under federal law, which is called a TEFRA hearing, and then consideration by the county of a final resolution approving the documents that had been provided in substantially final form. That resolution, I anticipate, would be what we call a parameters resolution, because the underwriter doesn't want to go into the market unless they know that the county has approved it. So the county board would be asked to consider the final resolution based on the documents, and then the parameters being the maturity date will not exceed this date, the interest rate will not exceed this amount. And then they sell the bonds, and then the county chairperson signs a certificate saying, yes, it is here, we give the pricing. Yes, it fell within those parameters. So procedurally, that process does take a little bit of time. And as I said, when we were on the phone, I think last week, we have applied to the WEDC for volume cap. It's one of a critical stake in the ground. We have represented that we hope to have an initial resolution from the county by December. So I would urge you in your discussions, whether at committee level or following tonight's meetings, if you feel like it's just a mountain too high and you don't think you could ever get comfortable being the conduit issuer, then I would hope you could tell us that, in November or December, or certainly before we started doing all this documentation and you started trying to, figure out what all those reports were. But I think I covered all of that, including, I think, the questions that you had on there. So I'm going to turn it back over. Is it you next, Ralph, or Nick? Are you up on who are the owners? You
I
ready
think
to
I
talk
have
about?
one slide, and then let Ralph
Okay,
take it home.
I was talking ahead of my slides.
And I think I've really covered everything on this slide, but just reiterating, at the end of the day, Macquarie Capital will own the vast majority of the project. Progressive will have a little sliver in a subordinate position. Vandergeest will not own any of the project. Vandergeest will be paid for his manure. But Vandergeest has a couple of other roles in the project. They're going to take the fiber that comes out of the digester, which is very sterile, and start using that for animal bedding and quit using the sand that they're on today. So that'll save them some substantial money, not having to buy sand every year, several $100,000 a year. So that's worth something for them. The amount of water, which was one of the questions going into the digester, and coming out of the digester will actually decrease the amount of water by about 10%. It doesn't use any more, it actually reduces the amount of water. So that'll reduce the amount that Vandergeest ends up land applying every year. And we're also going to put in a DAF, or dissolved air filtration system, so we're going to capture all of the phosphate values, and that also serves to reduce the mass amount. So the fiber is valuable to Vandergeest. Having less water to deal with will take some trucks off the road, reduce their land apply, and they'll be able to concentrate their land apply more. The remaining liquids that are left will go into the manure ponds, just like the liquids go into the manure ponds today, just a little bit less, about 10% less. And that liquid that comes out of that digester, that digester operates bugs in a oxygen-free environment, and basically, because it's oxygen-free and those bugs eat up all of the sugary materials, you basically have no bacteria left when you're done, which is quite a bit different than raw manure that's going into the ponds today. So there's some real benefits to it. I'll let Ralph talk a little bit more to that and take it home.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the project has a number of very significant benefits. The resulting waste stream after the renewable natural gas process is, as Nick indicated, nearly free of bacteria and is effectively 90% of what is currently in the form of the manure at any particular dairy farm, certainly Vandergeest being one of them, and the site of this project. The project is projected to produce approximately 150,000 British thermal units of gas per day, and it will reduce the greenhouse emissions by approximately 300,000 metric tons a day. I don't think I did that, did I?
No, you're good.
So again, continuing with the benefits, once the project is up and running, there's 10 permanent, very significant jobs to be created at that particular site. In addition to that, for the period of construction of about 18 to 24 months, there is approximately 80 construction jobs, all of which provide an economic benefit to Marathon County and to the surrounding area of the project itself. The revenue stream is enhanced by giving it a new revenue stream to the dairy, meaning one of the real benefits for the Vandergeest dairy, as has been the case with a number of the other dairy farms that Progressive Energy has been working on, is that it does provide a revenue stream, and in addition to that, will provide an increase in property taxes. So there's an ad valorem increase in taxes that will go to the county, school district, and other taxing districts as a result of the project. One of the questions that was asked was that of what the Marathon County would receive or possibly negotiate in the form of an issuer's fee. And Progressive Energy, while this is a very early stage in the process, Progressive Energy, as we move forward, is certainly willing to sit with the county administration and staff to work on an equitable solution in that regard. And then finally, the county has and will be able to say that they assisted in, without liability, the creation of a showcase environmental facility. There really is no environmental downside to any of these projects. Pushing. We're on one. Thank you. Thank you. So I believe Nick has covered quite in detail who Progressive Energy is and who Macquarie is. And there may be questions relative to that when we finish up. One of the other questions that we had was, what other Wisconsin projects has Progressive Energy been involved with? The Zahn Farms, as Nick has indicated, up in Gillett, Wisconsin, Oconto County has been completed. There's gas flowing into the tap and into the pipeline. El Na Farms is under contract in Keewatin County. Mar Brothers in Chippewa County is under contract. And in addition to the one in Marathon County, we expect that the financing will be finished in February of 2024. So it's just around the corner. 4 additional county dairies are considering contracts with Progressive Energy and Macquarie. They have contracts in front of them, and as you might expect, the lawyers are working hard to cross the T's and bring that to a close. Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Supervisors, in summary, I would suggest that the county, in its assistance by doing as Linda Templin has asked and suggested, providing an initial resolution and then ultimately the final resolution for the issuance of conduit bonds. The county has an ability to support your major agricultural industry here in Marathon County. You will receive significant job creation, economic development, and environmental cleanup as a result of the project. There is no demand for existing water supply. As I understand, that is an issue in Marathon County. In addition to that, the effluent from the digester itself will be cleaned to the extent that it will be available for irrigation. If you think of what is happening with your dairy farms today, manure is an issue. It's an environmental issue, and it will basically be satisfied quite significantly through the use of digesting the manure and creating renewable natural gas. And the county stays competitive and economically viable in this, what is on your license plates, the Dairyland State. So with that, Mr. Chairman, members, I'm going to ask if there are questions. You have on the legal side, Nick from Progressive Energy would, I'm sure, be more than happy to address them.
Okay, I'll open it up to questions. We have a request by Supervisor Sherfinsky. Supervisor Sherfinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have several questions, and don't take any of these questions, don't read too much into them. I'm just asking questions to understand more fully what the situation is. And my first question is, and again, don't read anything into this. I'm just want to understand the entire scenario. If at the end of the day we were to decide that Marathon County did not want to be involved as a conduit bond issuer, would the project still move forward?
Yeah, if that would occur, we have a couple other potential issuers. Frankly, one of them would be the town in which it's located, but our experience on other projects has been that where the town really doesn't have the administrative support, it became really difficult, and not just on this type of project, on any conduit bond issue. Towns didn't used to do conduit bond issues at all. Now, as many of them have tried to prevent being annexed to a village, they've tried to spur their economic development. But as you probably know, some of the towns still act with a 3-person board with a chairman and 2 supervisors, and the clerk works 2 full-time jobs and is trying to be the clerk. So the town didn't sound like it would be as aware or as capable, perhaps, as the county. And then I admit, my experience working with you guys on Bug Tussle encouraged me to come here. If both of those would not work, we could go to the PFA. And Marathon County is the host TEFRA county for the PFA, and as you're aware. And so we could go to the PFA. And we'd like to do it through Marathon County, but we're not without options. And the project would go forward.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that and the broader understanding. To follow up, relative to the scope of the project itself, so right now the project is envisioned as basically partnering with Vandergeest Farms. Is there any additional reserve capability built into the project if any other adjacent farms would or would not be interested in participating?
Let me just make a comment on the first part of that, and then Nick's the person to answer the second part. I wouldn't call what Progressive and Vandergeest a partnership. They're a supplier of feedstock for it. So there's a contract that we buy, they will buy the manure from them. But, you know, I mean, you go to the grocery store, you're not a partner with the
Right.
grocer, right?
Understood.
So I just want to make that clear. And then,
Yeah, so we're not currently planning to bring in manure from surrounding farms. But the way the digester, first of all, we'll size the digester for, Lee Vandergeest has some expansion plans, so we'll size it for where we think he's going to be in 2 or 3 years. But the way these digesters are built, we always leave room next to the digester. If we actually want to add on, we just add another row of cells to it, and you can do that as long as you have land available there. That's not in the current plan right now. With the CO2 scrubber, is on a big rack, and you have membranes on that rack, and the Vandergeest farm is going to need probably 12 to 14 membranes, but we'll buy a couple size bigger rack that would hold up to 20 membranes. So we build in extra room in there. We build the piping bigger than it needs to be. So everything, we get bigger compressors. We're redundant on everything. So, you know, we're prepared for further expansion if that's in the cards. But on this particular project, that's not actually in the plans right now.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Supervisor Wilhelm, please.
Thank you, Chairman. You answered my first question, but with the, I know I live in an area where Vandergeest like injects manure into the ground and it uses fertilizer. That'll be done, and then they'll be just using chemical fertilizer.
No, he'll still be land applied. Oh, sorry. Do it in twice. Think I can do it 3 times? No, he still will be land applying, but trying not to get too far into the technicals, but when we go through the DAF system, we'll have all the phosphate fertilizer will be in what we call a DAF cake. So that's a gooey 30% solids, and he can very selectively apply where he needs the phosphate fertilizer. One part of the liquid that comes out of a DAP is called tea water, and that has most of the nitrogen in it. So he can be very, very focused on applying phosphate and nitrogen and not be applying nearly as much. He could probably do it with a third to 40% applied after we process everything compared to what he does now. And he'll get all the nitrogen and phosphate because of the way we separate it. So I wish we could completely do away with it. And there is some water cleanup technology that's in development that I think will be here within 5 years. But that's not ready for commercial right now. So it's going to get better over time, but this is an incremental, much better step. And it doesn't smell like it does today. I mean, it really is much less, without that bacteria in the digestate, it's much less, whatever word you want to use for it. Stinky.
And then to add to that, are there any smells or anything that might disturb the area where people are going to be complaining about it, or is it something that
I'm sorry, didn't.
something like, you know, where with the neighbors around there, is there any issue where you're going to see complaints about from the neighbors, the locals that live in that area, or is it kind of you took care of the smells and.
Yeah, I think that was one of the questions. I don't think it's on this list, but we were asked that early on, and the county, somebody in the county asked that. And we'd be happy to work to develop a remediation plan if there are complaints, and make sure we try to be a good neighbor. We're not trying to cram anything down anybody's throat. I think you'll like what we're doing with this. It is an incremental improvement, but you know, if we had an accidental spill or something, we need to make that, clean that up. And by the way, we put the digester right next to the existing manure pond. So if the digester actually had a spill, it will just gravity flow down into the manure pond. So we have a backup system right off the bat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Lemmer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not my wheelhouse, so pardon my questions perhaps, but has the Village of Maine weighed in on this project?
No, we haven't approached them.
I actually have a meeting with
Oh,
them
you
on
do?
Thursday.
Okay.
I have just had a few emails with them, but we're going to sit down and talk on Thursday.
Will that be at a public meeting, or is that something just
This will be an
between-
initial meeting, but I believe they'll have a public meeting. I usually like to sit down with the chairman and the head of the finance committee typically and just kind of walk them through it so they know what it is and educate them, and then we'll go to a public forum.
And then it sounds like Vandergeests are selling land to you, is that correct?
They're leasing it to us.
So will any land be taken, I mean, is it zoned then in a different, say, industrial versus agriculture?
No, it'll be under their agricultural exemption. Because the digester is considered manure cleanup, that falls under the ag exempt. Some of the buildings won't fall under the ag exempt, and that's where the property tax comes in. But the whole facility, and actually because it's all intertwined with each other, the DNR doesn't care who owns it. They permit everything together. And so we have to modify the existing permits to, and then we also have to get an air permit, which Vandergeest doesn't even have today. Well, I think he does because he has a dryer, but he doesn't have one for what we're doing. So
And then just last question for you. You mentioned the fiber, that's one of the byproducts.
Right.
Is that used whole, or do they have to mix it? Because what I thought is it was very caustic and could burn the skin of the cattle, but is that not the case?
No, it's about 60% water, and they'll probably dry it down to about 50% water, but it will not burn. If they over dried it, it would certainly burn, but if they over dried it, it would be dusty, and the cows would be going up the cow's nose, and they won't do that. They'll probably put their plan is to not go below about 50% on the moisture.
And then just procedurally, this is probably for the chair. We do not have a policy on this. Is the goal today educational, and then we are going back to HRFP to talk about a potential policy on conduit borrowing, or what's our timeline and our role?
Well, it'll be referred back to the three committees that had questions on this for the discussion.
And any questions we don't answer today, we can certainly.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Thank you. Supervisor Rosenberg is next.
This is a standalone company, this Wisconsin Ring. You're talking about Progressive Energy, but is Progressive Energy into it? I mean, if something goes horribly wrong, who do you sue? And it's a limited liability company, it's just itself?
Well, that's partially a legal question. So I'm about ready to get in trouble, but, so the LLC, we call a project company. And so we will issue the bonds for this project through that LLC, and we'll issue bonds for other projects through different LLCs. And so if one of those projects got in trouble, we have the bonds ring fenced, and so they don't take down all the other projects with it. But at the end of the day, Macquarie capital has the deep pockets, and that's who everybody would go after if there were lawsuits. And so it really would depend on, what actually happened and what caused it to happen. With a project company set up separate like this, if there was a bankruptcy just because it was no longer economically viable, I don't know that there would be anybody to sue. It would just be gone. So,
Wait. In the offering document, there's always an independent third-party trustee. It's a bank. And they hold the collateral for the benefit of the bondholders. So assets, mortgages, security interest, everything's pledged to the trustee for the benefit of the bondholder. So let's play out this nightmare scenario where it isn't cash flowing and they aren't paying what they owe on the bonds. You probably wouldn't even know about it because you're not on the list of trustee and you are not in the linkage at all for payment. So you might not ever even know about it. What would happen in that instance, though, is there's a debt service reserve fund. So first they look to the debt service reserve fund to make the bondholders whole. But that's a limited amount. It's limited by federal tax law how much can be in that debt service reserve. If there is no longer money in the debt service reserve and it's still not cash flowing, the trustee would do exactly what he would do if you didn't pay your mortgage. They would foreclose on the assets that they're holding. And the bondholders are assuming that risk when they get that tax break, are able to borrow that cheaply. They're assuming that risk, that they read that plum from front to back, they evaluate the risk, they know what the collateral is and the value of the collateral, and they know that they have a third-party fiduciary who's going to try to squeeze every nickel out if they're not going to get paid 100 cents on the dollar. And again, you are not in that chain at all.
I'm not so interested in the bondholders, I'm interested in the people around it. If an environmental catastrophe or a thing blows up, it's natural gas, who do you
Well,
go
I don't know
after? A
about that.
Delaware company or New Jersey, wherever it is?
it's in Delaware, that's right. Well, with Macquarie's, not every project they've ever done has gone perfectly. And they normally don't turn it over for a foreclosure. They usually try to work it out. And even if they can't work it out, they may just go ahead and sell and liquidate it. It'd be rare for Macquarie to actually walk away from a project. As far as an RNG facility blowing up, I've never heard of it. Okay. We have emergency flares. We have backup systems that if that gas is escaping, we'll burn it off in a safe manner. And so I don't think there is much of a likelihood of an environmental catastrophe, but I guess it could always happen. Don't never say never, of course. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You're kind of answering my question, and if I'm a neighbor and something rotten happens, I may be out of luck.
Yeah.
Is this project eligible for grants, subsidies, that kind of thing?
There are some grants and there are some subsidies that it is potentially available for. First of all, under the Inflation Recovery Act, there's an investment tax credit that we will absolutely go after. There's a maximum of 50%. There's a 5% deduct because we're doing these bonds, so we actually could get up to 45% investment tax credit. There's some production tax credits that are available yearly after that. That's also through the Inflation Reduction Act. And as far as grants go, there's some limited amount of REAP grants, the Rural Economic REAP, Agricultural Program, I believe. So one of the farms that we didn't list here that we're working with, they're actually looking at about between $500,000 and $1 million REAP grant to put up some solar panels to help with the electricity and not be pulling it off the grid. But the amount of grants are really pretty limited. They're theoretically are some DOE grants, but the amount of brain damage you'd have to put in to maybe get a grant is probably not worth it.
The employment numbers, you said 12 full-time, or 10 full-time employees?
About 10 on the site, and there would be some, 2 or 3, maybe 4 truck drivers on top of that. Yeah,
Does Vandergeest lose employees?
I don't believe so. It's not an apples to apples. One of the benefits to Vandergeest is that this helps him deal with dealing with his waste and dealing with his land supply, and so he can use his resources to gradually expand his farm. So I think if anything, his employment will gradually go up over time because of the extra income he'll get from selling the manure to us. If we make enough money, he gets a little cut of the upside. That will help him expand, and that'll help him at least hold employment, not lose employment.
My last question is, why are you going 90 miles with trucks to put it in the A&R pipeline?
Well, there is a incremental, first of all, pipeline taps are very expensive. Second of all, there's not really a good pipeline tap alternative in this area. The third thing was Zon's farm. We've built that as a hub and spoke model, we call it. And so Zon is the hub, but we built that to bring in. We have two dairies we're looking to bring in. We're looking to double the size of his current size with manure coming in from surrounding areas. We're probably going to build that site into a very large site. Might very well be the largest in the state at the end of the day. So we consider Vandergeest one of the spoke farms. And Vandergeest is a good size, but they're not 7,000 to 8,000, and you really want to get into the 7,000 or 8,000 before you start making that one of your centralized locations. So it's a strategic thing for Macquarie, the way we look at it.
I have no idea if this is applicable, but Marathon County landfill is tapping into the line also.
There's only one tap at a landfill in the state, and that's at Madison.
Well, we're about to get it, right?
Are you about ready to get one here? I wasn't aware of that, if that's the case.
There's a
Okay.
possibility.
That's good.
I think Brown County might have one.
Is that the one on 32 right there?
Right on 29.
29, okay. Yeah, I think I pass it all the time.
When you came here, you did.
Yeah.
The Ringo landfill. Supervisor Dickinson's next.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you presented 11 benefits, additional energy, greenhouse emissions, taxes, jobs, waste removal, clean water, manure, smell, new construction, showcase facility, agricultural support, environmental cleanup, and on and on. Can someone please tell me what the negatives are? What are the risks for the county, or the residents in that area, or anything or anyone else? Because there's got to be some. Otherwise, we would do this all the time, wouldn't we? Any government agency. So there's got to be some sort of risk or negative. Can someone speak to that, please? Thank you.
I'm not an engineer or scientist, so I'm going to speak from the legal. It is not a liability of the county. I've had a long bond career. I've probably done 600 or more conduit bond financings. I have never, ever seen anyone come back on the conduit issuer for any payment, any liability, anything like that. It's clear under federal and state law, you are merely a conduit. So why don't people do it all the time? People do it all the time. I've done over 600 times. This is a new emerging technology, so we haven't seen this particular type of project in the hundreds, but we will in the next several years see it in the dozens. I know that's true because they're looking at 6 more, but I work with other people as well, and there are 5 or 6 other ones that I'm aware of in the 2024 pipeline. So it's emerging, and it's emerging fast, simply because, like I said, it's both policy and politically driven by the goals and intents to clean up the environment, to have more green energy, to get rid of toxic emissions, clean up the groundwater. So they've decided it's a good thing. So that's from the legal standpoint, that's what I can tell you.
So just in being perfectly honest, when I was first getting into this business, I took it on myself to study the failures in digester projects around the country. And I can talk about failures, but first of all, let's talk about DVO that's going to build this digester. They, last count, and they're probably higher by now, they had 35 that they've built in the state of Wisconsin. And with the exception of one, all of those have been positive and there haven't been a problem. On one of those digesters, the fiber building was built with a wood frame, and they had a natural gas dryer in there that somehow or another caught the building on fire and damaged the digester, so that project doesn't run today, but that wasn't because the digester doesn't work. That's because they built the building with wood. We don't have any flammable materials in the buildings we build. There's some projects, a couple projects that were built by DTE or Detroit Edison, Canards being a good example. Big upright tanks, they're too big. They can't keep them heated enough in winter. They don't work. Those digesters just sit there and do nothing. Same with a project that Goldman Sachs did right outside of Phoenix, Arizona. I have not heard of a major environmental spill of any type or an emissions release. The Dairyland project, they have an existing DVO digester over in Brown County. The Dairyland was using that in an engine to make electricity, and they quit doing that. So then they started flaring everything. They had this gigantic big orange flare, and all the neighbors were up in arms about it, calling the fire department twice a week. And they had to specially engineer a cap to stop that. Okay, so you have some small instances like that, but I'm not aware of any catastrophic issue with the digester project. And if anybody's ever heard of one, please tell me about it. But that's kind of my experience looking at all the failures in the country. Non-proven technology is often behind a failure. All the technology we use is best in class and very proven and running in a lot of places. So, I mean, that's my perspective from a how the project works perspective.
So, Dick, if I might just add to that, Mr. Chairman.
Can you use a mic? Otherwise, it doesn't get.
If I might just add to that, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, if it's so good, I think that was part of your question, sir. If it's so good, why doesn't everybody do it? If there's so much upside to it, Nick, I think it's important to note that not every dairy qualifies because of the size of the dairy herd that's at that particular dairy. There is a minimum that effectively qualifies for a digester that will produce enough gas to make it economical for the dairy itself and also for the developers. I would only just add to what Nick has said about the digesters, the DVO digesters from Chilton, Wisconsin. There are over 120, not necessarily all at dairies, but 120 DVO digesters working in this country today. And he's got, I think last I heard, nearly 5 foreign countries that he's working on. But the size of the dairy does make a difference. And to your question, sir, you listened carefully to the benefits of the project. Thank you.
Okay, Administrator Lund, please.
Sure, and again, just Supervisor Dickinson, and I am certainly not an expert in digesters, but you guys hire me to tell you things and give you my thoughts, so I will. I'll accept the opportunity to Supervisor Dickinson's questions. We did have some discussion at HR Finance earlier this afternoon, and this topic did come up, so I do want to convey one piece of information that our financial advisor provided us, talking about negatives in the event the project did not have a positive outcome. As Attorney Templin referenced, I do think there's certainly the financial risk. It doesn't impact the county. No one's coming after the county. But I thought our financial advisor raised a good question, which may be of value to you, and that is kind of the headline impact. Marathon County, despite all of the documentation that we're not taking on financial risk, you're not pledging the county's GO obligation, general obligation debt. You will be, I presume, and I suspect, associated with the project. So our financial advisor indicated that is something perhaps, that if it didn't work well, you would have that quote-unquote headline impact. We did have some discussion at Environmental Resource Committee about the desire, at least from some of the members there, to engage the DNR to kind of see their, get their input on some of the concerns, and I know they were addressed relative to water utilization. But again, I'm not an expert in these digesters, so I would defer to the DNR as to whether or not there are any issues there. And lastly, I think one of the supervisors already raised a question about the Village of Maine and adjacent landowners. Again, not an expert, but I learned way too much about RNG plants and working with your landfill agreement earlier this year. If it's anything like the landfill, methane scrubbing,
It's very different,
very different.
very different.
Okay, are they large? Is this a
A
very
a landfill is going to be typically about 4 times larger than one of our projects, but what's the difference is in a landfill, you have all kinds of unwanted things, like a lot of nitrogen content, maybe even mercury, some heavy metals, and all of that has to be scrubbed out. They use a completely different scrubbing technology, which we call a PSA, pressurized steamed absorption. We use a membrane technology. A membrane technology wouldn't work because of all the impurities. Fortunately, with these cows, it's just pretty much pure methane and a little bit of sulfur we have to scrub out, and that's basically it. It's really a pretty clean process comparatively.
So that was my other thought, that landowners, adjacent neighbors might see a large facility and they may have some complaints. The last part of Supervisor Dickinson's question, again, the idea that why aren't we receiving more requests? Well, interestingly, about a week or 10 days ago, I did get another individual representing another entity reach out and left me a voicemail. I haven't had the opportunity to confer with them yet, but I actually just sent them an email earlier today. And they are likely to have a similar request of the county to serve as that conduit issuer and would like to get in front of you relative to an initial resolution. So again, it's governed by statute, as Attorney Templin referenced. If you look at Chapter 66, it's point 1103, right? 1101.
Well, a number of sections.
If you look within that section, you'll see there's a fairly long list. So I think with the higher interest rates, I would suspect that with the cost of capital increasing, you may see more of those. But again, I'm certainly not an expert in this area.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Marash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned the 10 new permanent jobs, and Supervisor Rosenberg referenced that as well. But I was curious as to what kind of jobs they would be and what kind of salaries would be expected.
Type of jobs and
Oh, so there'll be a plant manager for our facility, at each facility. So we're hiring the biggest company in the United States to run these facilities for us. And they're the biggest operator of DVO digesters in the country. A company called Regenis. They happen to be out of Washington State. And so the 10 individuals that I mentioned does not include the office in Appleton that they're putting in for their Wisconsin presence. But they will hire a site manager. There'll be typically a couple of people there day and night. There'll be a couple of maintenance people that might be shared facilities between this facility and one or two of the other ones we might build. There'll be a couple of operators for the truck loading facility, probably in the neighborhood of 3, because you're talking split shifts. Again, there'll be 2 or 3 probably permitted truck drivers. As to the salaries, I'm not entirely sure of that, but a site manager is probably going to be making, I'm making an educated guess, 90 to 110. The maintenance people probably in the 70 or 80,000 a year. The laborers and truck drivers, they're probably going to be in the, Ralph, what do you think, $35 an hour type range? So they're pretty good jobs. They're not minimum wage jobs.
Okay, thank you. And then with the 80 construction jobs being created, will you be using any local contractors or subcontractors?
We try to use as many local contractors as we can. First thing we do when we go into one of these dairies and we say, who do you like to do your buildings for you? Well, they like Merrill equipment out of Merrill. So we'll be using Merrill. Joe Rudolph, if you know Joe, good guy. I haven't had that conversation with him as to who his electrical is, but we'll certainly take a look at using his electrical contractor. Merrill Equipment will do all of the piping from all of the barns, but he'll likely subcontract that to their local piping guy. We'll use a local excavator. If we can find them, we'll use local bricklayers. We had a lot of trouble with that on the last project. We couldn't find them. We actually had to bring them in from out of state. The CO2 scrubber, we're looking at using Unison. They're out of Dubuque. I don't know if you consider that's local, but it's close. We already mentioned the DVO digester. Those are people in Chilton. So we're using as many local as we can, but not everybody. There's another thing we have to do, by the way, when it's connected to wages. For us to get the maximum investment tax credit, we have to pay what we call prevailing wages. So we don't have to have a union shop per se, but we have to pay union scale wages. And we also have to run a training program for some of the key apprentice positions. And we'll be doing that. We're gearing up to do that.
Okay, thank you. And then one more. You mentioned a land lease agreement with Vandergeest. How long would that be?
The lease agreement?
Yes.
15 years.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Baker is next.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. In the presentation, one place it says 150,000 million BTUs per day and the others per annual. Can you clarify which is correct?
Yeah, that's per annual. Ralph made a mistake there. Yeah.
Okay, Supervisor Lamont, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, it would have been fun to have a picture of what one of these digesters look like, and you'll probably provide that down the road, or?
I can give you plenty of pictures of the one we just commercialized. It's on, and if you went to DVOinc.com, you could see plenty of pictures on.
I'm wondering how big are they, or is it anything open to the air?
Well, it depends on how many cows we're doing, but I don't know the exact dimensions at Vandergeest, but it'll actually have it on my computer if you want to know the exact numbers, but it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 feet wide, 310 feet long, and 18 feet deep. These digesters, of the 18 feet deep, 16 feet in the ground, and we use the ground as insulation, and you'd have about 2 feet above ground.
Okay, and what's it made of? You mentioned brick, wood?
The digester's made of, they pour, with forms, they pour concrete. So it's concrete and tons of rebarb, and then a lot of steel piping on the inside.
And membranes you were mentioning.
The membranes are really highly specialized, but I think of them as, I don't know the exact length, but it's like a mile of really, really tough, thick cheesecloth all wrapped up into this thing that's only about this big. And they're running everything through that. That's why they call it a membrane. It's like a giant cheesecloth kind of thing, about this big and about this long. That's about how big a membrane is.
And as far as energy to get this, it's anaerobic, but you've got to use energy to scrub, do all these other things.
Yeah.
What energy is being used?
The anaerobic digester will have a boiler, natural gas fired, to hold temperature. So we like to run at 101 degrees. The bugs like that, and that's the same. And by the way, these digesters are built to be a highly efficient artificial cow stomach. And so it's the same process that happens in a cow stomach, except we're getting much higher capture. So the digester itself will have some pumps, but probably doesn't draw that much electricity. It'll be in the neighborhood of 200 to 250 kilowatts per hour. The CO2 scrubber uses significantly more digester, and the big use of more electricity. The bigger use of electricity is we have to have these big compressors to step it up to about 250 psi going into the scrubbers, and then when we come out of the scrubbers, we go directly into the trucks, and we'll be stepping that up to 2,500 plus psi. So we have two sets of very big compressors, and so that'll draw somewhere in the neighborhood of it'll be over a megawatt per hour. It's substantial.
Very interesting. Thank you.
And I've already talked to the local utility, and they have more than enough natural gas and electricity supply for what we're talking about. They're happy to serve us. So there's actually not a shortage. There was a shortage of transmission in the area, but they've fixed that. I think they've run a new line right along, I believe, County Road K, if you know where that is. Not sure if I have that right, but it might be A. I think you're right. Yeah.
Supervisor Seibert, please.
Thanks, Chairman Gibbs. I have three questions. How much is the DNR involved?
Supervisor Seibert, please use the microphone.
How much is the DNR involved? Does the DNR require accounts with money put aside for any kind of a disaster? And where do the filters end up? That's the three questions.
So the DNR is very heavily involved. So we have to modify the existing agricultural permit. We have to get a new air permit. We have to do a wetland delineation study and apply for a water treatment and water disposal plan. And they do hold open hearings, particularly on the air permit, with the public notice, and they're very hands-on. We use an environmental engineering firm out of Green Bay called GHD, and we'll spend quite a bit of money on permits and with the DNR, and there's a lot of back and forth that goes between the lawyers and the engineers. They do not require us to put aside a reserve fund to deal with an issue, but they will require indemnifications by the project that if there is an issue that it'll get paid for. If they find you and you didn't comply with their plans, they would shut you down, and that would be a much bigger problem for us. So there's a pretty big incentive there. The third question was.
The filters, where's the...
Oh, the filters.
The filters, do they end up in our landfill, or and
They
what's in
try to
these filters?
recycle those as much as they can. I think there's a limit to how many times you can recycle them. Eventually, they will end up in a landfill. That's correct.
Supervisor Sandalski, please.
Thank you. I got three questions too here. As far as 150,000 MMBTU, how does that convert to like therms? As far as therms, natural gas.
Just multiply by 10 to convert the therms.
Okay. The second one is, so where's the gas going to be used? Is that going to be used in Oconto County then, or?
We will inject it into the pipeline and sell it into the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard program. So it'll end up in buses and trucks and in vehicles and charging stations in California. As the Low Carbon Fuel Standard program expands throughout the United States and Canada, we'll look at the alternatives we have as to where to take it. So there is a Midwest effort currently going on, which will probably result in a LCFS program sometime in the next 2 or 3 years, being led by Minnesota, but Wisconsin's part of it. Oregon and Washington State have already put it in. The East Coast states, led by New York and Pennsylvania, are looking at a big program. Colorado's looking at it. And by the end of this year, all of Canada will put in a program. So kind of, gee, I don't want to talk politics, but if you look at the blue states, that's where it's kind of happening right now. And a few exceptions, Florida's looking at it, and Texas won't touch it. So about half the country is basically putting in I don't want to call it LCFS, let's just call it a carbon reduction program of some sort, with either a carbon tax or a credit for reducing carbon and fuels that are used primarily in transportation, with an eye, not mainly, but partially toward the electrification thing that's going on. So,
okay. And then my last one. So if a county didn't do bonding on it, would a private equity firm be willing to take the risk without bonding through county or any government agency?
oh, absolutely. So what wasn't said earlier when Linda was talking about alternatives, at the end of the day, if we couldn't get the tax-free bond deal done, we would probably do taxable bonds, and that would probably result in a 2.5% higher interest rate. It's not the end of the world, but it costs money. As far as private equity firms, Macquarie Capital, basically, they don't call themselves a private equity firm because their ultimate parent company of Macquarie Capital is Macquarie Bank. They're basically like the Chase Manhattan of Asia, and so Macquarie Capital is reinvesting profits from Macquarie Group and Macquarie Bank. So they basically operate like a private equity firm, but it's internal. They're not using external money, so they don't call themselves a private equity firm, but that they essentially are.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Excuse me, Supervisor Stravinsky, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So two additional questions. One would be, what is the projected service life of a facility like this? And then following that, what does the decommissioning process look like, and what is left with the landholder at the end of that decommissioning process?
So first of all, on the life, the DVO digesters that were built in, the first one was built in 1980 or 1981. It was built for a meatpacking facility in Green Bay by DVO. That plant still runs. Okay, so we don't know the ultimate life of these plants. We know it's at least 25 years. With proper maintenance, it could be 35 or 40 years. That's the physical life. What we also don't know is, I can't tell you where the markets will be in the carbon markets in 2050? I have no idea. They may be, the price may be way up here, or they may figure out how to do carbon capture directly from the air, and prices may be way down here. And so there's a feasible life and there's a technical life. But I would tell you 25 years is a good number to hang your hat on. We in negotiations with the dairies, the question comes up a lot. Well, when you go away, what's left, and how do you dismantle this thing and clean it up? That digester that I talked about, that's in the ground, you would actually leave that there, and the dairies love the idea that they can use that as an additional manure storage pond, or use it for water storage, or use it for backup if they're existing manure ponds. So they actually, they look at that and say, gee, that's a nice facility. The CO2 scrubber and all the other equipment, the compressors, we would probably dismantle those and sell them in the third-party market as used equipment. The buildings, we're not going to tear down the buildings, so the dairies basically can utilize those buildings for what they want to use them for if we walk away. So there's some useful stuff there. You're not going to dig up piping in the ground. That's going to continue to work. And in fact, in the case of the Vandergeest dairy, and I didn't mention this before, we were talking about water. Part of our project is to enhance the closed loop water system that they have in place today. We're going to upgrade that system. So what does that mean? That means we're recycling water and not using new water. We're going to try to recycle. Lee's going to try to not use more than 5 to 10% new water and have the rest come from recycle with that closed loop system. So with the closed loop system and all the piping to move all the manure out of the barns and into a central location, they said very specifically, you have to keep that running. You can't dismantle any of that. They find that valuable, and so those are some other side benefits they get from this project. It helps them manage both their water and their manure handling, if you will.
Okay, we got two left, Supervisor Robinson and then Supervisor Gonring. But Supervisor Robinson first, please.
So can you walk me through the process? So your feedstock is coming from the farm and from their current storage pits, or how will the process work?
No, we would not go into the current storage pits except for some starter manure to get the bugs going. This is all going to be fresh scraped. In the case of Vandergeest, he also uses some flush water to wash down the barn floor. So he washes and scrapes, and a lot of that wash water is what we're going to be recycling. So once you, the one thing about methane is it basically has a 10-year half-life, and so that a lot of the methane, and it's not a linear curve. It's more like one of these parabolic things, and so in 10 years it's all gone. But the drop off in the early part, the first 30 to 60 days, you get quite a bit of evaporation of the manure. So that manure that's in the ponds is not really that valuable to us because you won't get the yield. So we're going to be scraping right off the barn floors, going into, there'll be a reception pit in every barn. That will flow by pipe to a central reception pit right next to the digester, and they'll go right into the digester. And we're trying not to lose, we'll be doing that 3 times a day, and so we're trying not to lose any energy value as much as possible.
So that from an output perspective, then you're reducing the amount of bacteria, you're removing the methane, therefore you're reducing the odor in the neighborhood? So from the perspective of the neighborhood, they should see a significant improvement in air quality?
Yeah, I'm from a city. Okay, I'm not a country guy, and when I get around a farm that doesn't have a digester, it's kind of offensive to me. I'm not used to it, and I get around a farm that has a digester, and that digester is not overloaded with too much, and they're fully digesting. I'm not going to tell you it's pleasant. I'm not going to go that far. But it's not offensive to me. And, so I'm kind of the, the tester. Some people don't seem to notice as much as I do, but it's tolerable is maybe the best word I could use on it.
Okay, Supervisor Gondering, please.
I have a question. When the manure is run through a digester, is there residue?
No, your mic is not on, please. Supervisor, your mic was not on, please.
Can you hear me? When the manure is run through the digester, is there residue that can be spread back on the fields, or are there chemicals that you have to dispose of?
There is we'll be putting in the Vandergeest a DAF or DAF or dissolved air filtration system, and there is a solvent that is used in that process, but that solvent I believe is made from, is it peanut shells? I mean, it's fully biodegradable and it's organic. So there are no other chemicals used in the process. So in a DAF, we have a system for, it's an air flotation system, so we separate out the heavy solids that have 90% of the phosphates in it. And we'll end up with a big pile of DAF cake, and that has all the phosphate fertilizer values in it. And so the farm can be very, very targeted in using that as fertilizer, as opposed to today they're just throwing a ton of raw manure all over the place, trying to get as much fertilizer value as you can. We'll also get the tea water coming off the DAF, and that will have most of the nitrogen in it. But that's a fairly significant volume. Unfortunately, there are some technologies being developed out there in the water treatment world that will concentrate the nitrogen fertilizer values, but none of those processes are ready for commercial right now. They're being tested at some very big dairy farms. Fair Oaks down in Indiana, if you're familiar with that. It's the biggest, it's a collection of 9 big dairy farms, the biggest renewable natural gas facility in the country, I think in the world. So it's all progressing. What we're going to do on this round, there'll be another round in 5 years, in my opinion, and it'll just get better over time.
Well, with that, I did have one question. From approval, if the board were to approve the bonding authority to actual construction to actual operation, what kind of time frame are we looking at, especially with obviously the understanding that you're having a WPDS permit update and all the other permitting requirements?
Yeah, I would say base case from closing of financing to commercial operation, base case conservatively 15 months. Right. And we're trying to close financing in February.
Sure. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you. I would like to express my sincere thank you to Linda and to Ralph and to Nick for providing the county board with all of the answers that they had on the questions. And if, as you had offered, as the committees do their deliberation, if there's additional questions, we'll reach out to you and hopefully find opportunities for moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we'll move on to the remainder of the agenda. We have item number C, and that's consent agenda. Item C9 through item C13A. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Shafinsky, second by Supervisor Wilhelm. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we will proceed to vote. Supervisor Zhang? Okay. Supervisor Langenhan, I know we needed a voice vote from you. Aye. Thank you. Supervisor McEwen and Supervisor Hardinger, if you could give me your responses verbally, please.
Supervisor McEwen, yes.
And Supervisor Hardinger, please.
Yes.
Thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to the Environmental Resources Committee, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee, and Public Safety Committee. Item D, 14, a resolution to accept state, local hazard mitigation grant program assistance resolution 54-23. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Mask and second by Supervisor Wilhelm. Any discussion? Any discussion? Yes. And just note to the board, this does require a 2/3 majority, and seeing there is no discussion, we will move to vote. Supervisor Langenhan.
Aye.
Supervisor Vice Chair McEwen.
Aye.
And Supervisor Hardinger.
Aye.
Thank you, and we will proceed. And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. And we will move on to the Extension, Education, Economic Development Committee, the Marathon County government's role in providing affordable, high-quality external childcare. Resolution 55-23. Motion, excuse me. Now I'll accept the motion. Motion by Supervisor Baker and second by Supervisor Sherfinsky. Supervisor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of the comments made by Dave Ekman from the Chamber of Commerce and the fact that they're holding a town hall meeting tomorrow called Child Care Town Hall, Understanding the Shifting Sands, I think you all received an invitation. I would move to postpone this item until the December 16th meeting to give us an opportunity to see what the what comes out of that meeting and whether or not there are opportunities for public-private partnerships.
Is a motion, preferential motion, in order? Is there a second for that second to the motion to postpone? Motion seconded by Supervisor Van Cray. We now have a motion to postpone on the floor. Okay, because this is a preferential motion, we are now in discussion about the motion to postpone and not a motion on the original motion. Any discussion? Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I am going to vote no on that. We have discussed this for probably 6 months. The dates have been known since we passed our strategic plan, and we've had plenty of opportunity for input. I was going to offer an amendment to make it clear that we would be still considering and still discussing with the local groups and business owners. So I don't believe that this resolution in any way stops us from having that discussion. I've signed up to go to the meeting tomorrow night, but I think that we should proceed with our plans. So that's my input. Thank you.
Supervisor Krause, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's an assumption to assume that the requirements for being child care, having a child care business, that the requirements are too stringent, and that's why there has been such a huge drop in child care businesses. No one has brought up the issue of what are these rules that are so stringent that is making everyone drop out of the childcare business. I would like to know what they are. I think that's important to know. If you're running a business and you don't like the rules for running this business, and we're supposed to say that all those rules are bad when we don't know what those rules are, or what those requirements are that are turning people away from going into the childcare business. I have worked in childcare, and at one time I had like about 16 kids in the room, and they were kindergartners, they were young first, second, and third graders, and after-school kids, and it was just chaos. I can tell you there was just too many kids. I went to the supervisor, and she says, well, that's what the requirements are. We can have that many kids and that a wide variety of ages.
Supervisor Krause, I would hope
like to...
Supervisor Krause, please. I'd like to have a discussion. We're discussing the motion to postpone, and so if you've made your point that you don't have information, but I'd like to keep the comments germane to the motion to postpone, please.
My comment is germane is that we don't know what these requirements are, and I mentioned one that that was too vague. That was way beyond what the child care requirements, I think, should be there, that they should be more stringent. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Scherfinski.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to address the question about relative to requirements, state requirements, whatever they might be.
Again, I want to keep the discussion germane to the question about a motion to postpone.
If you allow me to, I will. The point is the original motion does not specify any direction other than investigation. So I think that we need to understand and be clear that the original motion is talking about investigation. It doesn't draw any conclusions, and therefore I don't think that would be a reasonable reason to try and postpone any action on the original motion. Thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't see there any reason to postpone. I see it very clearly. If you believe that government has a role in childcare, then you should postpone, because then we would be at the table working with these businesses and non-governmental organizations to figure out a way to provide childcare. If you don't believe that government has a role in childcare, there's no reason to postpone it. So all we're doing here is kicking this down the road for another month, so that we can lead these organizations on to the belief that we think, or some people think in the room, that government can help with childcare. We've talked about this and other things as well, housing for one, and the other is the workforce shortage. I think we need to take a step back and say this is not our role, and let these organizations determine on their own how they will provide for childcare for their workers or other residents. So I see no reason to postpone. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
So we had the business community come to us and ask for us to postpone so they can evaluate the opportunities for public-private partnerships. And I think you heard Dave Ekman say that those that win this battle will win, on child care, advance their opportunities to recruit workforces. Other counties, Washington County, which is far from a liberal county, have adopted policies where they've chosen to work with it. The problem with the resolution is it said we're not going to use any resources before we've gone to the table. If you're going to come to the table without resources, you probably won't have a seat at the table. And I think what we want to do is not look at what happened 2 generations ago, a generation ago, even yesterday. We need to look at what's happening tomorrow relative to our ability to meet the needs of the workforce. The meeting tomorrow is a part of that discussion. Do we want a seat at the table? I think we do. we have opportunities as an employer to deal with our employees, but we also have a responsibility as part of this community to engage in those discussions. This is not a motion to kill. It's delaying it to a time certain to give us an opportunity to process the information that is shared tomorrow, and I would encourage you to support the postponement.
Supervisor Lemmer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to piggyback off of that, the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce has a 5-chapter series called Tipping Point. I would encourage you all to watch their quick little 5-6 minute segments that really talk about the need to get workforce here. I have said it before, I'll say it again. This is an infrastructure issue, because if you cannot get your kids into childcare and take them to a safe place, you can't go to work. And with the childcare system the way it is, it costs too much for a facility to do. Not enough money are coming in from parents. And so parents are young families who we want in this community. They're the ones that are running for office and joining our boards and filling our schools. They are taking themselves out of the workforce to care for their children. So I think we do have a role in that. I think government does have a role in infrastructure. And I would like to postpone this so that we can come to the table with something meaningful. And the very first, now therefore be it resolved, takes any financial off. And I think that's a problem. It's not the type of leader that I want to be, is to come to a meeting and say, well, we won't help. I want to help. So.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While we may want to help, we have limited resources. We have a scope that is largely driven by our state statutes of what things we are required to do. There are earned income tax credits, there's federal child tax credits, there's state child tax credits. There are many tax credits that other entities are doing that could be applied to daycare. And if we tackle the daycare and say that's our responsibility because there's a need, we all know that there's a housing need. If we do one, we're going to have to do the other. And where are the resources going to come from that?
Supervisor Zhang, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to echo the remarks made by Supervisor Robinson. I think it's very important to note that we are one of the larger employers in this local area here. This motion is not to kill this resolution, but rather to defer or to postpone it until the December meeting. It doesn't mean that we're making any conclusion but rather we're doing our due diligence, investigating, and making sure that every avenue is looked at as well. We have to do our due diligence to our businesses, our residents, our constituents, and as an employer as well too, trying to attract the most talented individuals to come to our local area here. So I will be voting in support of this resolution, of this motion to postpone, and I encourage my fellow colleagues to do so as well.
Supervisor Shafinsky next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to remind everyone that we're discussing the motion on whether or not to postpone. So I'm going to call the question on that particular motion.
We have two people in the queue. Is there any objection to question being called? Is there any objection to question being called? Okay, we have two people in the queue, but we will vote on the question without, because our rule still says we're currently still have to vote on the motion to our question being called. Is there a second to the motion or to the question being called? Seconded by Supervisor Bushman. Okay, this is a 2/3 majority vote requirement. So it is not debatable. It is just requires a 2/3 majority. So as soon as the clerk has the motion typed in, we will then proceed to vote, but she needs time to. So we will proceed to vote, and the voting now is on the question being called. So I vote with 2/3 majority will end debate on a motion to postpone to the December meeting. Again, I vote ends debate. There will be 2 additional people that will be allowed to address the board, and that is Supervisor Boots and Supervisor Baker, if the aye votes have it. Is everybody clear what you're voting on? Voting on ending debate. Okay, we will proceed to vote. Supervisor Langenhan.
Aye.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Aye.
And Supervisor Hardinger.
Aye.
And we'll proceed. The motion is carried. The ayes have it. Debate is ended. We have 2 additional individuals to address the board on the motion to postpone. Supervisor Baker is first.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So several people commented that the reason not to postpone was because of the first resolution, and specifically because we wouldn't be using ARPA funding. And I would say that we have, in the past, HR Finance had a process by which we were going to approve outside projects for ARPA funding, and that process kind of ended in a black eye for the county, in my opinion. We went out and we asked a lot of people to do a lot of work and provide us with grant applications, and then those were all turned down because we decided that it wasn't allowable use of ARPA funding for things other than our direct, our county-related projects. And I don't purport to understand that whole philosophy. So I don't know if we can allow Corp Counsel to comment on that, or if that's not allowed at this point. But if we can, I would appreciate the chance for whether this is even allowable use for ARPA funding.
Corp Counsel will address the question if he feels that it is appropriate at this time.
Sure. I think it's a good question to consider when the county is appropriating ARPA funding. The county still can't use that funding on something that the county can't appropriate money for. So if there's something that the county is interested in doing, but the county doesn't have the statutory authority to do it, we can't use ARPA funds as an end around our statutory limitations. So if there was a request to use ARPA funds on something related to childcare, we would need to be very specific about what is the request, and is that something that the county can actually appropriate money for. If the county doesn't have the statutory authority to do that, then in my opinion, it wouldn't be an appropriate use of ARPA funds because we'd be violating state law. So I hope that answers your question, Supervisor.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Boots.
Yeah, I just want to briefly say I think this is kind of a consideration thing. I think there's some people in here that want to get some more information before we do vote on this. And I think that we owe it to the business community also. Dave Ekman's been a pillar for our community for a long time, for the chamber. And if he asks us this, I think it's something we should grant him. We're not shooting it down tonight. We're just saying give us another month or time to be determined to have somebody else look at this. Because if I were to vote on this now, I would say no, I'll be honest with you, because I haven't had a chance to listen to what the department had to say. So, thank you.
Okay. Okay, that will then end debate. The question before the individuals, each individual is, do you, I vote would postpone the resolution and be brought up in December's meeting. And so a no vote will, if successful, will require the board to take up the original motion to approve. Everybody clear on what you're voting on? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Aye.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Aye.
And Supervisor Hardinger, please.
Aye.
Thank you, and we will proceed. And the ayes have it. The motion is, or the resolution is deferred until December. And we will move on to announcements and/or requests. There's mail in your mailboxes, so please check the clerk's, the mail room in the clerk's office. We need signatures from HR Finance. There's 2. We need signatures from ERC, and we need signatures from EEDC. Who is this? We do not need a signature from EEDC. We do need public safety, though. Excuse me. Any other announcements and/or requests? Seeing none, I'll take the next infamous motion and second. Supervisor Rosenberg with a motion, Supervisor Drabeck with a second. Excuse me. I think I will take the 2 that have used the system. Supervisor Van Cray, Supervisor Hart with a motion, Supervisor Van Cray with a second. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We stand adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.